Good afternoon, and thank you again for joining us for today's webinar, Capitalizing on the Affordable Housing Program for Home Ownership and Small Rental Developments. Today's presenters are Matthew Keene and Dave Buches. Matthew has 6 years of affordable housing experience working on the construction of home ownership developments and with multifamily developers to secure financing for their deals. Prior to joining Diamond & Associates, Matthew worked at King Park Development Corporation, an Indianapolis-based community development corporation focused on both affordable housing and economic development. After 3 years at King Park Development Corporation, Matthew relocated to Philadelphia. He currently supports senior and family multi-family development deals in Pennsylvania. Matthew has advanced the firm's expertise in accessing Federal Home Loan Bank affordable housing program monies in multiple districts across the country. Matthew currently resides in West Philadelphia and serves on the Young Professionals Board of Habitat for Humanity of Philadelphia. He holds a Community Leadership Certificate from the Indianapolis Neighborhood Resource Clinic and has completed the Housing Development Finance Professional Certification Program from the National Development Council. Matthew holds a Bachelor of Science in Political Science from Indiana University and holds a real estate license in Pennsylvania. Matthew?
Thanks for that, Colleen. Just wanted to take a moment and say hi to everyone. I'm Matthew, and looking forward to talking to you a little bit about the Affordable Housing Program today. So thanks for the opportunity.
David Buches serves as a Community Investment Manager at the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh. The FHLBank is a government-sponsored wholesale bank that provides banking services to nearly 300 participating member financial institutions in the states of Delaware, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. In his position, Mr. Buches is responsible for promoting the bank's community investment programs throughout his assigned area of responsibility, which includes the state of Delaware and the eastern and central portions of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Mr. Buches provides program information and technical assistance to both FHLBank members and housing development organizations located in his area of responsibility. Thank you both, Matthew and David, for joining us today, and I'm going to turn the presentation over to David.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar that we are hoping will help you better understand and potentially take advantage of the affordable housing program, particularly for home ownership and small rental projects you might be considering. As Colleen said, I am David Buches. I work in the Community Investment Department at the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh. I also want to mention a special guest who is listening in with us. Fred Banuelos is on the line, and we will talk about why he is so special later in the presentation, so please stay tuned for that. I'm going to lead off with a high-level review of the affordable housing program and the application process, and then my co-presenter, Matthew, is going to get into some specific tactics to consider while you develop your project concept. So we are, as I said earlier, talking about the Affordable Housing Program. The Affordable Housing Program is a program offered by the Federal Home Loan Bank. Yes, I said banks, plural. There are 11 Federal Home Loan Banks across the country, as this map illustrates. And Matthew will be talking later about why that is important for you all to know. You can also see from the map that the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh, our footprint includes not only Pennsylvania, but also West Virginia, and it's really kind of hard to see on the map, but Delaware is in there as well. So Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Delaware is the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh district. The primary purpose of the Federal Home Loan Bank system overall, the 11 banks in the system, is to provide access to capital to the members of the Federal Home Loan Bank. So we are a membership organization with each of the 11 banks organized as cooperatives, which means that each member of the Federal Home Loan Bank has a piece of the ownership of the Federal Home Loan Bank that they are a member of. Membership in the Federal Home Loan Banks is limited to financial institutions, including credit unions and community development financial institutions, and also insurance companies are eligible for membership. Now, the core business of the Federal Home Loan Banks, as I mentioned, is to provide access to capital. Each of the Federal Home Loan Banks are considered government-sponsored enterprises, which means that their debt, among other things, which it means that their debt is guaranteed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. This GSE status allows each of the Federal Home Loan Banks to borrow money off the capital markets cheaply. That capital is then extended to its members as loans at very favorable rates, comparatively favorable rates in the market. So what I just described is the core business of the Federal Home Loan Bank system. Next slide, please. So how do we get from there, that core business, to the affordable housing program? Well, in return for that favorable GSE government-sponsored enterprise status, each Federal Home Loan Bank is required to set aside 10% of its earnings each year for affordable housing. The affordable housing program is the primary vehicle for the allocation of that set-aside in each of the 11 Federal Home Loan Bank districts. For the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh, in 2018, that set-aside amounted to $30 million in funds in the affordable housing program. The Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh will declare its 2018 earnings at the end of February and will, at the same time, set the 2019 AHP set-aside figure for the upcoming funding round. We expect it to be no lower than the $30 million we made available for 2018, but again, until earnings are declared, that number will not be formally set. Each Federal Home Loan Bank sets the maximum amount awarded per project under the AHP for its district. In the case of Pittsburgh, the maximum grant amount is set at $750,000. That AHP award can be taken as either a grant or a low-cost advance, which advance is a fancy way of saying a loan. A low-cost advance requires repayment, and as I'm sure most of you know, most affordable housing projects typically cannot support debt. So as you can imagine, most project sponsors opt for the $750,000 in grant funds. I mentioned before that we are a membership organization, so everything we do includes a member involvement component. In the case of the Affordable Housing Program, the application for the Affordable Housing Program funds is submitted by a member on behalf of a project sponsor. So it is a joint application involving a member of the Federal Home Loan Bank and the project sponsor. You need a member to partner with if you want to participate in this program. And then finally, it is a competitive application process, and I'm going to talk about the components of that competitive process shortly. This slide that starts with project types and income requirements, it is meant to demonstrate the flexibility of the program in terms of how it can be used. In terms of tenure type, you can see there that it supports a variety of tenure options: rental, lease purchase, owner-occupied rehabilitation, and it also supports a variety of project types: new construction, rehabilitation, acquisition. There is also there are two threshold requirements. The first being that the AHP is income restricted and limited to households with incomes less than 80% of the AMI, the area median income. To give you some idea of what that translates into in Pennsylvania, the 80% income limit for family of four is provided there for both Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. The other threshold requirement pertains to rental projects only, and the requirement is that those types of projects have at least 20% of the units reserved for households with incomes at or below 50% of the AMI, which is the very low income standard. And this is a requirement that just is in place to ensure that the program serves, at least on a small percentage basis, serves very low income households, which is a national target. Next slide. I mentioned that the AHP funds are allocated to projects on a competitive basis. The program employs a 100-point application scoring system. The regulation governing the affordable housing program requires certain point categories as listed on this slide. But within each of those required categories, it's important to note that there is some discretion provided to each Federal Home Loan Bank to define things like scoring criteria, maximum points awarded, and required documentation. Just two things to call your attention to when you look at those scoring categories. There are 7 scoring categories that are required by the AHP regulation: donated property, nonprofit sponsor, targeting, housing for the homeless, empowerment, subsidy per unit, and community stability. And then there are things called first and second district priorities. So this is the Affordable Housing Program's regulation. This is their way of providing each of the 11 Federal Home Loan Banks with some discretion in addressing their priorities in their market areas. So for these scoring categories, each Federal Home Loan Bank can choose from a broader list of activities that more closely reflects its particular needs. And this is why, when you look at this list of scoring categories, why the AHP, the Affordable Housing Program implementation plan that I mentioned earlier, is so important to you as a potential participant. Annually, usually in the first quarter, each Federal Home Loan Bank publishes an implementation plan for its affordable housing program that defines how they will implement their program for the year. The plan defines their scoring criteria, including their district priorities, sets the maximum point values within that 100-point overall limit, and specifies the documentation needed to support the points requested. Beyond the scoring details, the implementation plan also provides the standard for determining project feasibility, which I'll talk a little bit about in a couple slides. So if you are seriously considering an application for affordable housing program funds, my advice to you is to read the implementation plan and read it from cover to cover. It covers scoring and feasibility in detail. The Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh's implementation plan is available now and can be downloaded from our website. Next slide, please. So this slide provides a summary of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh scoring categories. Can you see or can you guess what the first and second district priorities are from that list? Well, our first district priority actually includes special needs, rural projects, and member financial participation. You see those grouped right there. And then the second district priority is readiness to proceed, and all the others reflect those 7 required categories that I mentioned. So this summary is important not only because it identifies our first and second district priorities, but it also shows the maximum points we've assigned to each category, and also designates which point categories are fixed or variable. Our implementation plan further defines each of the scoring categories, including how the scoring works for those categories designated as variable, okay, and how to score along that variable range of points. Scoring definitions are very transparent, so much so that you can literally score your project ahead of time and determine if it'll be competitive. That note at the bottom left there gives you a guideline for scoring yourself based on the results of the last funding round. The lowest score from the 2018 round that was awarded AHP funds was a 64.5. Typically, the scoring from previous rounds is a pretty good starting point for determining the competitiveness of your application. Next slide. Besides the scoring criteria, the other reason the implementation plan is a very valuable resource is because it also defines the feasibility standards for projects. Our AHP award process has 2 steps. The first being the competitive scoring, which we just talked about, and the second equally important step is determining if the application meets the program feasibility guides. An application must first score competitively, then it must be determined to be feasible using the feasibility guidelines that are defined again in the implementation plan. Those guidelines address things like cost reasonableness, need for subsidy and readiness to proceed, which is described through the financial statements that we require, development team capacity, and market demand. The guidelines for each of these are defined again in the implementation plan. So that's why that is such an important document if you are considering a project. Next slide. So before I close with a discussion of what are considered key dates, what is the takeaway? Well, again, my recommendation is that you carefully review the AHP implementation plan. You do that as early in your project planning process as possible. And the implementation plan is available on our website and can be downloaded now. To supplement this high-level review that I am providing today, I would recommend that you also review the online resources that will be provided on our web page. As I mentioned, the implementation plan is available right now to be downloaded. By March 25th, we will also post a variety of affordable housing program guides, forms, and webinars that are available to take advantage of as of that date. Everything from how to register your project and access the online application system to how to fill out the various forms that we require. In addition, we offer 2 types of technical assistance, which will open on April the 1st. Project-based and systems-related. Systems-related refers primarily to the online application and any mechanical or systems-related issues that difficulties you might be having with that system. You can request technical assistance all the way up until the August 8th closing. Project-based assistance, which is what it says, it's basically technical assistance related to your project. Does require sending in a technical assistance request form, which is available on the web page, and that request form requires that you at least be able to describe your project concept and identify the specific issues that you would like assistance with. I'll also mention that as part of that technical assistance, we do offer a matching service. As I mentioned earlier, this application is a joint application with a member of the Federal Home Loan Bank. We do, in those cases where a sponsor, wants to be matched with a participating or an interested member of the Federal Home Loan Bank, we will assist you with making that match. Obviously, you can't submit an application without a member partner, so we do offer that as additional technical assistance. It is important to note that for 2019, we are closing the project-based assistance option on June 28th. Okay, so technical assistance opens on April 1st, but it closes on June 28th, well in advance of the application date. So you need to get your project concept developed and take advantage of technical assistance as early as possible if you're going to meet that June 28th date. After that date, you will only be able to get systems-related assistance. Also mention that June 17th is the date that the AHP online system opens for application inputs. The closing date for applications is August 8th at 5 o'clock, no exceptions. And then we expect that awards will be announced by no later than December the 19th, 2019.
Steve,
so that concludes my I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, we did have one question that came in. Do you have to use union or prevailing wage on the projects?
No, you do not. Now, again, keep in mind that we're a gap financer, so I say that, as far as the AHP requirements are concerned, but if we truly are being used as a gap filler for a larger project where there are multiple sources, you need your primary source. So, for example, if this is a low-income housing tax credit project where the equity piece is going to be the largest piece in the deal, you got to make sure that you abide by the wage requirements for the primary funder. I'm just saying that if this is a straightaway AHP deal, we don't require prevailing wages.
great. Thank you.
So that concludes my remarks, and at this point, I guess if there are no other questions, we can turn it over to Matthew.
Well, thank you, Dave. Again, my name is Matthew Keene. I'm with Diamond Associates. I've been with Diamond Associates for the last 3 years, and over the course of the last 5 to 6 years, Diamond Associates has gotten about $15 million from the Federal Home Loan Bank from multiple districts. First of all, I want to say that Dave did a great job giving an overview of the system. I want to note that the last few slides were Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh specific. So these key dates that you're seeing right now are all related specifically to the Pittsburgh district. And each district will actually have its own set of dates and calendar that you need to be concerned with. So I've kind of moved along here to the next slide to talk about some of the other districts that you can look at. And that's really where I want to talk, or what I want to start by talking about is that the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh is a great base for people in this area and in Pennsylvania and the surrounding region to look at in order to get your first layer of funding. But if we are looking to try to do a small rental development or a home ownership deal, this is going to be kind of one of your main sources of funding. And so in order to try to either one, stack different Federal Home Loan Banks together to make up enough money to do your project, or to phase your project in order to go to a couple different Federal Home Loan Bank districts or just one district to fund your project, we're going to want to keep in mind that there's a lot of different options out there. So this slide here is trying to give you a sense of that there are applications throughout the year for all 11 districts. And as Dave said, it's important to go back to that implementation plan because everything that you're going to want to know about any of these districts are going to be in that implementation plan, and they're going to be similar but also completely different within each district. So you can see the timeline here. The main districts that people in Pennsylvania are going to have access to are the Pittsburgh district, obviously, the New York district, which has an application in April, the Atlanta district, which is in July, the Boston district in September, and then there's some opportunities as well for Cincinnati and San Francisco, with then the rest of them, the opportunities kind of start dwindling from there. And I want to reiterate what Dave said here, that the member banks is really your access to each of these districts. So it's really important to look at the catchment area that you're working in or where you're looking to put your project and look and see what are the major banking financial institutions in that area that might be interested in partnering with you in order to put in an application to a district. So you can go to each district's website in order to look up and see, is Wells Fargo a member of this district? Is JP Morgan Chase a member? So on and so forth, to try to figure that out. And then finally on this slide, the Pittsburgh district has a maximum award amount of $750,000, but the other districts have different maximums. So San Francisco, you can get up to $2 million. Atlanta, you can get $500,000. In New York, you can get $40,000 per unit. So it does vary from each district. So you can kind of determine, again, what district makes sense for you based off of how much money you need and what your project is. So before I move on, I do want to just say, if you have any questions, please feel free to type it into the box, and I'll try to do my best to answer questions as they come up. And then we'll also provide time at the end to answer additional questions moving forward. So the next slide here is, again, just trying to talk about planning ahead. So a lot of times projects, you already have a project in mind and then you start looking for funding. I recommend a lot of times trying to start with the funding of understanding that the Federal Home Loan Bank system is the only affordable housing funding system that grows each year. Seemingly more money is available each year while all the rest of the affordable housing funding sources seem to dwindle each year. So I think thinking about this is the funding that I want, and these are the districts that are available to me because I know the banks in my area, then you can look at those specific implementation plans and those scoring criteria to then craft your project around that in order to give yourself the best, to put the best foot forward in order to win the funding. So this is just saying that you want to look at your location, the timing of when those applications are going to go in and when you want to do the project, what kind of project that you're doing. In this case, we're talking about a small rental development or homeownership deal, and then the money that you need. So when all of those kind of come together, then we're going to find that sweet spot in the center where you can get all the money you need in order to make your deal feasible. The two ways that I'm really, the next few slides are really just going to go into a couple of examples. And the two ways that I see utilizing the affordable housing program is either one through stacking or through phasing, which I said earlier. Stacking meaning that I'm going to go after multiple district fundings in successive years in order to stack on top of each other and fill in the gaps that I have in my project. And phasing being exactly as it sounds, where I'm going to phase my project over 2, 3, 4 years, and maybe I'm going to go into the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh each year for that specific phase, and then kind of build as you go in for the next phase and the next phase and the next phase. So I'm going to start out by talking about stacking. So as I explained, stacking is just taking multiple Federal Home Loan Bank districts and stacking them on top of each other. What I've tried to do is put a small rental rehabilitation example out there. And here in this example, I'm assuming that I am a nonprofit in Pennsylvania, and I have 20 units of rental that I'm trying to recapitalize. So with stacking generally, you want to try to be strategic about selecting your sites, again, going back to being based on the scoring criteria. If you already have the sites, it makes it a little more difficult. But again, trying to be as strategic as possible within the constraints that your project, within your constraints of your project, it's always going to make sense to just focus on what your strengths are. So in this example, I'm just going to kind of run down what the scoring criteria that I felt like I was able to get in this small rental rehabilitation example, and then we'll look at the sources and uses for this as well. So because I already own the property, I'm not going to get any donated property scores here. So I'm missing out. I'm kind of have a leg down, I guess, because I'm not getting that. But if you can find a project that does have that donated property score, it's only going to help you. In this case, I'm assuming I'm a nonprofit sponsor, so I'm going to get all the points for being a nonprofit. I will say that it's going to be very difficult for for-profit developers to get the points needed for small rental and home ownership deals. And that's because the affordable housing program is such a large portion of the funding, many times you won't be able to score very well in a category like readiness to proceed because you will not be able to show 75% of your funding, development funding committed already. So that gets into the district priority scoring. So some of these things really play off of each other. So in this case, again, I'm not getting donated property points. I am going to get nonprofit points. I am going to go after targeting points. And targeting for any rental project throughout all the districts, if you can achieve 60% of all of your units to be reserved for residents that are 50% AMI or below, you're going to maximize your targeting score. And that targeting score is normally a pretty big chunk. It's normally between 20 and 25 points, depending on the district. So it's some place that you really want to try to maximize. And so in this case, I'm focused on getting as many units at 50% AMI or below in order to maximize the targeting. Housing for homeless is one of the basic scoring categories throughout all the districts. In this case, I'm not going to be serving anyone that is homeless, but if your organization has the ability to partner with someone, that's a great way to get a leg up and give yourself an extra few points. Next is the empowerments. So Dave didn't go into what empowerments typically are, but these are typically different services that are being provided to your residents. It could be a tenant council that you've organized. It could be case management. It could be some sort of life skills class. It could be some sort of counseling. In the case of homeownership, homeownership counseling or sweat equity. All of those, you're going to want to focus on what your organization already provides to your residents, and then what other organizations you can partner with to maximize the amount of services that you're providing. So this, again, is a place that you really want to try to maximize your points, especially with the small rental rehabilitation where you're trying to kind of cobble together enough points to get this project done and scoring correctly. Next is first district priority. So as Dave said, these are going to change from district to district and where you have to focus in on the specific implementation plans to the districts that you're looking at. In this case, I'm utilizing the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh as a base, and one of their first district priorities is member participation. And so I'm assuming that I'm going to meet that member participation, which is some sort of financing from your member bank, or in the case of the Pittsburgh district, getting a donation of at least $300 per unit. And in this example, I'm assuming that I'm going to get the $300 per unit from the member bank. Also, I'm assuming I'm going to go after some special needs. So special needs is normally a fairly broad category with the Federal Home Loan Bank system. Normally this is anybody with some sort of mental disability, a physical disability. It could be someone recovering from chemical abuse. It could be someone recovering from physical or emotional abuse, or maybe living with HIV or AIDS. So all of these things can fit into the definition of special needs. But again, I'm going to refer you back to the implementation plan for your specific district because they're going to change from district to district. And I didn't mention this at Housing for Homeless, but that's also the same there, where each district has slightly different definitions of what Housing for Homeless means. And then next, the second district priority. These are also the things that can change from district to district. In Pittsburgh, I'm going to go after the ready to proceed points. And I say that we should use Pittsburgh as a base because they're a little unique in the sense that the affordable housing program requests that you're making to them counts towards the committed funding that you have for your project. So if I have a project of $1 million that's going to cost $1 million, I'm going to go into Pittsburgh to ask for $750,000. In order to get the readiness to proceed points, I need to show 75% of funding committed. So the AHP alone helps get me to that 75%. So so it's a little easier to score that. But if you move over to the New York district, they want 75% of committed funding. But if your AHP ask is over 50% of the total project, then you can't receive any points in that category. So again, they're similarly named, but the specifics are different, which is why you got to really focus and read cover to cover. So I'm going to sound like a broken record with the implementation plan, going back and looking at that. The other one here is veterans. I put in veterans because specifically in the examples of sources and uses that I'm going to show you at the next slide, one option is to go to the Atlanta district, and veterans are a scoring category there. I also felt that it's possible for me to combine maybe a veteran that has a special need, maybe they have a physical disability and are a veteran, and I can target that market in order to maximize my points for that option to make my deal work. And then finally, in second district priority, small developments. In the New York district, there's a specific category just for small developments. So if you have a development that's under 25 units, you're automatically going to get 5 points. So each district has little differences like that you can try to tailor your project towards to give yourself the best opportunity to win. The next one, subsidy per unit points. So I put marginal points here because this is where you can really play around to try to get as many dollars as possible. So if I initially thinking I'm going to go in and ask for the total of $750,000 from Pittsburgh, but I go through a scoring process and I got only 64 and not 64.5, which, as Dave said, was the lowest funded score last year, then maybe I come in and say, all right, well, I'm going to sacrifice $50,000 and only go for $700,000, or I'm going to go down to $500,000 in order to make up an additional point, and so I can put myself in a competitive position. So that's where I'm talking about marginal points, and this is a place where you can kind of play around with your points in order to maximize the potential to win funding. And then finally, community stability. Yes, always go after as much community stability, and this goes back to understanding your location and trying to plan your project around the points for the district. So looking before, as you're setting up your project, understanding, are you in a qualified census tract? Are you preserving affordable housing? Are you doing historic rehab? Is there some sort of revitalization plan in place that's approved by the city? So understanding all those things, and again, those are going to change from district to district on what they're going to give points under community stability for. So I know I didn't give specific point totals for each one of these, and Dave did give you that for Pittsburgh, but I didn't do that because each district is really different in the total points allocation for each section, and so I wanted to just give you the baseline and then kind of refer you back to that implementation plan in order to really start tallying up your points. So in this example, again, I'm doing two different options here when you're stacking. Utilizing the Pittsburgh funding as a base, where I've asked for the maximum amount of $750,000. I was then able to stack on top a second AHP funding of either $650,000 in option 1 or option 2 doing $500,000. So in these cases, I'm stacking with either New York or Atlanta. And the thought process here would be to say, okay, I have my rental units. I know what I need. I know generally what rehab I need to do. And then understanding that, I can then say, all right, well, I know that there's a bank that is nearby that can help get me into the Pittsburgh application and a New York application. So then we can work on getting the Pittsburgh application first, winning that award. Then the next year go into New York and win $650,000. And then take both of those and combine that with some other fundraising that I've done, and then I'm able to finally close and renovate this property. So the things that I will say that, as Dave mentioned, this is gap financing. It's going to be very difficult for you to be able to stack 3 or 4 Federal Home Loan Banks on top of each other in order to fund the entire project specifically with AHP funding. So you'll see that here I'm assuming that you're going to go out and get foundation funding as well, but maybe that's local home dollars that you're using for that. Maybe there's another grant, maybe it's CDBG, maybe there could be different options out there that could work, but you are going to have to go out and fundraise a little bit on your own. I also put the member bank contribution, so this is the $300 per unit for the Pittsburgh application. So I wanted to make sure that you saw that that is something that will have to be listed separately, at least for the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh application. And then I have a sponsor capital contribution. So this could be higher or lower depending on what you can fundraise. But what I did is I tried to cap it at roughly half of what your developer fee is, as you can see down below in the uses. So one of the great things about the Federal Home Loan Bank system is that they will pay a developer fee. They don't have any problem with seeing a developer fee and paying it. I know that in my experience, some nonprofits aren't used to calculating what they're paying themselves in order to do these projects, and I would advocate that you should be maximizing that amount of money, because that's free money that you can, that is money that's coming into you that's unrestricted that you can use to seed your next project or go back into this project in order to fill the final gap to make this happen. It seems like some people are still stuck on the stacking slide and it hasn't gone through. I'm hoping that most people can see. Colleen, can you see that it's switching slide?
I can see it switching.
Okay. And it may be a specific issue. So, but hopefully most people can see it. Okay. Seems like it did switch now for that particular person. So again, this stacking is just showing two different options in order to start with the Pittsburgh application, win that funding, and then utilize that as a springboard onto a second AHP application, and in this case looking at New York or Atlanta. So then the next way to look at this after this is to do phasing, which is exactly as it sounds. In the sense of like you're going to take a project and you're going to phase it over the course of a number of years. And in this case, you are not going to phase it. Sorry, let me restate this. So for phasing, you are not going to go to multiple districts, though I guess you could. But typically what I would see is that you might go to the same district over the course of a number of years in order to fund your project. So for this example, as was said in my intro, I'm a member of the Habitat for Humanity Philadelphia Young Professionals Board. I also work with Habitat for Humanity in Philadelphia to do some work. And this example is one that I worked with them on Diamond Park, which was 17 units that we went in to the Federal Home Loan Bank in order to get funded. And we did that over a course of 3 years. And here, again, going through the different scoring criteria. In this case, it was new construction, so we were able to get the property donated, which was a big boost. We had a nonprofit sponsor. And we were able to get some targeting points. If you do the math here, you'll see we didn't get to that 60%. We didn't get to that 60% of units that would be 50% AMI or less, but we did get to a fairly high number. And also I will say that for homeownership, you're not guaranteed to get the maximum points if you make it to that 60% threshold. So you're also going to be looking at the formula that's provided in the implementation plan to look at what your score will actually be. One of the questions that just came in was asking about the time frame which you have to spend all these funds. So that also depends from district to district. Typically what you see is that you have a maximum time period of 3 years in order to spend the funding. Many districts say that they want to see some movement within the first 12 months. And that movement could be, I've secured additional funding, and that satisfies and allows you to get an extension. Some districts just say, spend the money in 3 years. So again, that's going to go from district to district on how that's going to work. There's another question earlier that I can answer now. What should a nonprofit pay to a developer for a $5 million project that the nonprofit will own? So I can't really answer what a nonprofit should pay to a developer. In my examples, I'm assuming that the nonprofit would be the developer themselves, not that you would necessarily partner with a developer. And specifically going back to the nonprofit sponsor points, in order for you to get those points, you have to have a significant some sort of significant part in the development process. So you can't just be a part of the development that doesn't do anything. You really do have to take a part in either screening candidates or managing the property, owning the property, something in a way that says that you are significant to this development. So I can't tell you exactly what a nonprofit should pay to a developer if you are partnering. That's going to be a negotiation between you and that for-profit. So if there are more questions, keep them coming in, and I'll try to answer them as they come. But going back to this Diamond Park example, here again, so targeting, we were able to get a lot of the points for targeting, though we didn't maximize them. Housing for homeless, we did get points for this. Habitat does work with some organizations that help people that are homeless get into housing. And you'll notice that one of the things you'll notice in the implementation plan is that typically you have to get points for homeless, you have to at least get 20% of your units to meet that category. But in this case, you'll notice that 2 units are not 20% of 17. And again, because we phased the development, we had smaller unit counts for each phase, and so we were able to meet that 20% threshold in some phases, while other phases we didn't go after those points. Empowerments, we were able to maximize those by doing sweat equity and pre-homeownership counseling and post-homeownership counseling. First district priority, we were able to show that we have member participation. Second district priority, we were ready to proceed. We had all the funding committed for these projects during each phase. Subsidy per unit, we were asking for the maximum, so a lot of times we weren't getting a lot of points there, or 0 points even in a lot of cases, but we didn't need them because we made it up with other items like homeless for housing, or housing for homeless, or donated property. And then community stability, we also received those points that it made it able to work. So here, I'm hoping this slide turned. I know that there were some issues with the slides switching. But here we're showing the sources and uses for the phasing with Diamond Park, and how we separated out from first application in 2016 going all the way to 2018, where we just won for the last 5 units for this development. So the total development cost, $3.2 million roughly. And again, we're showing how we were able to get the AHP funding, all from the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh throughout the 3 application rounds. We were able to get foundation funding, the member bank contributions, as well to maximize the participation. Because this is Habitat, in this case we had in-kind materials donated. And then finally the homeowner's mortgages. So in the homeownership side of things, the mortgages are going to be part of your capital stack. And if you're Habitat or a similar organization, you're going to have to provide the net present value of those, and because it will be coming in over 30 years. It's not the total mortgage amount, but a portion of it. And then again, the sponsor capital contributions. So these are the basic sources and uses here, and how we were able to maximize the Federal Home Loan Bank in order to fund the large majority of the costs for this project. So there's a couple other questions here before I move on. And really, I'll go ahead and change the slide to the key takeaways that I have here. But one of the questions, location of the project does not have to be in a sponsoring bank district. So that is correct. So your project can be in Pennsylvania, but you can apply to the district in New York. You could apply to the district in San Francisco. And it all comes down to whether or not your bank that you're partnering with is interested in partnering with you and is a member of that district. So Wells Fargo is a member of the San Francisco district. They're also a member of, I think, the Des Moines district and the Dallas district. So if you have a Wells Fargo in your area or have a relationship with them, you could go and talk to them about, hey, I have this project. I'd love to partner with you on getting some financing or some donations. And I was wondering if you could help me get to the San Francisco district, because I looked at the implementation plan and I score really well there. So that's how you can kind of leverage the financial institutions in your area in order to seek out funding from other districts. Another question, have you seen lots of projects funded where nonprofit is not the primary developer and has a strong developer partner? So I have definitely seen projects funded where that's possible. I would say most of the ones that I work on have been nonprofits as the primary developer, especially when it comes to these examples. you definitely can partner, but again, I want to just reiterate that that nonprofit, one, has to be the actual sponsor of this application, and that you need to show that you have some sort of control of the development process, that you're not just ceding everything over to the for-profit, and that you are, many times you will have to show that you are receiving a portion of the developer fee as well. Another question here is, what is the definition of donated property, and can it be reduced price against appraised value? And the answer is yes, it can be the reduced price. Again, I'm going to refer you back to the implementation plan of each district because it's going to depend. So some districts it has to be for a minimal value, like $100. But other districts, it could be considered donated property if it's just 50%. You get it for 50% of the total appraised value. So there's gray areas there where each district is going to define things differently. So onto the slide, the key takeaways here are, again, really become aware of the financial institutions in your area. So know what your catchment area is, where you want to do a project, understand the banks in that area, and then figure out where those banks are members or what districts they're members of. And then that can help guide you to say, all right, well, let's look at the ones they're members of and to start there and see how you score from that point forward. Next, then looking at the sites that you're selected and seeing, are these in districts that can help, are these in areas that are part of a revitalization district? Is it QCT? And understanding the community stability scoring criteria in the districts that you're looking at to see if you fit within that. Next, figure out your empowerments. What are you already providing? What's an easy lift for you to do? And how can you maximize your empowerment score? And then finally, just understanding the timing, going back to that, and that understanding that this is going to take multiple years to acquire the amount of money that you're going to need to get. And so anticipate that it's going to take a little while, and figure out whether that means that you're going to stack applications to multiple districts, or you're going to phase it over the course of 2 or 3 years to get this done. So that's really all I have. I want to make sure there's more opportunity for questions, but I also just want to say thank you. Diamond Associates has been doing this work for a while, and you can see our team there in the photo. Thank you so much for listening with everyone. And then I know that Dave wanted to go back and make his special introduction about Fred, but then once that's done, then we'll leave it open for questions until we run out of time. So Dave, go ahead.
Yes, so I mentioned earlier that we had a special guest, Fred Banuelos. There he is there on the slide, the last slide, along with his contact information. Fred is taking my place at the Federal Home Loan Bank as I am retiring at the end of April. Since that event is right in the middle of the technical assistance period, you will need to know who he is and how to get in touch with him. So there's Fred, and please feel free to contact him as well, or use him as a resource as you begin to put together and plan your affordable housing program applications.
Great. Thank you, Matt and Dave. And then I saw one question come in, and it says, is all this tied to HUD requirements? For example, HUD says I need separate bedrooms for boys and girls. We are building micro apartments, and boys and girls could share the rooms. So does the program require those requirements as well?
Speaking for Pittsburgh, no, we don't. We are not necessarily governed by those requirements. No.
Yeah, I would say most of these districts are not really governed by HUD requirements. They're regulated by the federal government, but I don't believe regulated by HUD. And so there are some crossovers, like when it comes to the incomes and understanding, what the area median income. They rely on HUD for that, but outside of that, I believe that there aren't requirements that you have to follow from HUD. Does that sound
Yeah,
correct, Dave?
and I would just reiterate what I said earlier about what position the Federal Home Loan Bank money is relative to your other funders. For example, if you're funding a project that has HUD money in it, probably they don't care if they're 10% or 20% or 80% of the project, that they're probably going to make the entire project comply. All right.
Yep.
But as far as us requiring that, for example, if $750,000 from us and we were the primary financer, we don't have that requirement.
Okay, and we do have a couple more minutes for questions, so if you want to type them in, that would be great. Also, if you'd like to ask your question over the phone, you can press *6, and that will unmute your line. And that's *6 to unmute your phone line and ask a question if you have any questions.
As we're waiting for questions, if there are any, I do want to just say that both Dave and I are aware that the Federal Home Loan Bank districts overall are undergoing some changes through some final rules, which might change some of the set-aside opportunities for particular projects in each district. And so, Dave, maybe you can talk a little bit more about some of those final rule changes, but my understanding is that it would still be a scoring. A lot of what we talked about today would be very similar, but there would be more opportunities for a specific pool of money set aside for a specific district priority.
Yeah, correct. I mean, I think the biggest change is going to be the ability of each Federal Home Loan Bank to create separate funding pools based on what they feel are their critical needs, whereas right now we have one pool and everybody kind of swims in the same pool, whether you're home ownership or rental, whether you're special needs or you're family households, everybody gets treated the same. So that the ability to create these separate pools might create a little bit more of a competitive advantage for different types of housing. This year's a transition year. That rule was just published. I don't see anything happening relative to Pittsburgh in 2019, but I would say when they get to publishing the 2020 implementation plan at the end of 2019, you're probably going to see some movement in that regard. So change is coming, so that's good.
Great. So we'll just give it one more second. We're running, and then we just got a question. Is there a minimum or maximum number of units which makes sense?
I think there's really there's not, and that's really going to just play into the other scoring criteria. I mean, because there's a subsidy per unit scoring category in each district, so if you are spreading your Federal Home Loan Bank money over a large number of units, then you're going to score really well on that category, and that's going to give you a leg up and help make up for something where you didn't score very well. And so that's why these smaller developments are a little bit more difficult, because you're sacrificing those points and you got to make them up in other ways, either through like a special needs or a homeless or a donated property in order to compete with the big LIHTC developments that have a lot of units that they're spreading their funding over. But there is no minimum or maximum. It's really just if you score and you get if you get the points necessary, and as Dave said earlier, utilizing the previous round's lowest funded score is a good starting point to see whether you're competitive. But if you get the points, then you're going to win, and it doesn't matter how big or small your project is. Dave, is there anything you would add to that?
No, I agree. I think it's the biggest change there would be there really is no minimum or maximum other than how it plays out on that subsidy per in our system, how it plays out on that subsidy per unit scale.
Great. So that actually concludes our webinar today. I want to thank Matt and Dave again for joining us and presenting. We really appreciate it. And I want to thank everybody for joining, and have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Before everyone leaves, I just want to give a huge thanks to Dave for all the work he's really done with the Federal Home Loan Bank. He's been immensely helpful to every time that I've done an application. So thank you, Dave, for everything, and we look forward to working with Fred in the future. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.